Not so long ago, a boy was born into a large family, father, mother, and 8 children. He also belonged, as they all did in those days, to a wider extended family and to the community as a whole. He was raised speaking Mike in and outside of home. His evenings were spent around the fireside, hearing stories from his father, telling him their history and legends. He would retell those stories the following day while working in the fields, sowing or harvesting maize or coffee with his family. The stories were all told in Mike, stories of the victorious and the vanquished, ghost stories meant to keep the children away from dark places and safe at night, and struggles against hostile nature, drought, rain, sun, and wind that produced confrontations, often forcing forms of cooperation for survival. Cooperation as the ultimate goal in the community was a constant theme. They were good and bad storytellers. A good storyteller could tell the same story over and over again, and it would always be fresh to the listeners. He or she could tell someone else's story and make it more alive and dramatic. The differences really were in the use of words and images and the inflection of tone. This boy therefore learned to value words for their meaning and nuances. Language was not a mere string of words, they had a suggestive power well beyond the surface meaning. His appreciation of the suggestive power of language was reinforced by the games he played with words, through riddles, proverbs, and through nonsensical but musically arranged words. So he learned the music of his language on top of the content. The language, through images and symbols, gave his view of the world, but it also had a beauty of its own. The home and fields were then his preschool, but what was important was that the language around the fireside, and the language of his immediate and wider community, and the language of his work in the fields was one language. And then he went to school, and then harmony was broken. The language of his education was no longer the language of his culture. Thus, another language was taking him further and further from himself to other selves, from his world to other worlds. This story could be the story of my father or mother, or any of your parents. We were born and raised hearing the language of our parents, a language that shapes how we understand the world. It is a language of love, laughter, and friendship, of discovery, wonder, and personal triumph. It is a language where we connect ourselves with others in a network of cooperation, where we learn to maintain and develop our culture. This exchange is still occurring today. Maybe some of us no longer harvest maize or pick coffee with our families. Maybe we no longer tell each other stories that encompass our internal struggles of right and wrong, but we still hear our fathers and mothers speak to us in that language that we all share, a language we seem to lose when we go to school. I wasn't raised in Todontepec. I never learned Mije. I wasn't raised growing maize or coffee. I didn't learn to love the mountains and forests of the Sierra. We never shared stories that taught us how we should live, but the story I told is still my story too. My father was Domitilo Amaya Rivera, and my mother is Rosalia Gomez, and both were born and raised in Totontepec, and both share the same experience with your home as all of you. And as they learned Mije at home and in the fields, and learned Spanish in school, I learned Spanish at home and learned English in school. The language that was used to show me love, laughter, and friendship, the language I used to discover the world and connect with others, was a language I lost when I went to school. This means I know how a language can teach you about yourself and the world around you. This also means I know the great advantage of knowing another language, that through the study of other languages, we can better relate and connect with the greater world around us. A world filled with people who see everything just a little bit differently than we do. People and cultures that can teach us other ways that can help us raise families and improve the quality of our life for our communities. But at the same time, I also know how the study of a language and a culture other than your own can make you forget who you are and where you come from. That can make you feel lost and alone and searching for connections among people who will never share the love you have for open skies and cloud forests, who will never share the love you have for your home. The Miha language needs an alphabet. Writers and educators need to express themselves and enable others to express themselves. Stories are needed that capture how you view yourself in the world, stories that show your unique way of life. A At the same time, we need stories that show your universal human experience that transcend cultural differences. We need stories that show your connection with everyone else. Education, regardless of language or culture, develops the mind, enabling critical thinking and problem solving, but depending on the language and its relation to the larger social context, can hinder academic and economic success. These challenges are not specific to Tontotopec, but are being faced by indigenous communities across Mexico and Latin America. For example, to bridge the gap between cultural and linguistic differences, educators in the indigenous region of Michoacan are teaching children math in their own language with very positive results. A combination of mathematical instruction and indigenous language immersion has improved reading and writing, critical thinking, and problem solving skills that have later transferred to Spanish learning and thinking. These results are not specific to Mexico but are seen throughout places where different languages interact and affect quality of life. As a result, indigenous bilingual students tend to stay in school longer, obtain better results, and generally acquire better grasp of not only the national language, but their own language as well. With a greater understanding of both, indigenous peoples can attain greater academic success that later enables greater economic success within the social environment of Mexico. Persons with the ability to work bilingually are more likely to be hired for civil service jobs, where government departments accommodate the language needs of the indigenous and non-indigenous populations. Bilingual expression in Mije and Spanish is especially important for jobs in the state of Oaxaca, but also in Mexico City, where many Mije speakers seek unemployment. There are currently over 100,000 Mije speakers in the state of Oaxaca alone who face many challenges and need to have their voices heard. These challenges are magnified by those Mije who seek employment outside of their home state, where they are a much smaller minority, and many of whom cannot proficiently read or write Spanish. But I think there is something you can begin to do that will later enable you to face these challenges for yourself, your community, and maybe other Mije speaking peoples. And so, as an alternative to written texts, my suggestion to you, the youth of Totontepec, is to begin or continue to develop oral stories of yourselves and your community that combine old traditions with new ideas so that you can bridge the gap between your two languages and cultures and create a place where you can affect the life of your family, Totontepec, but also other Mije speakers. All of you are familiar with your oral traditions. They are the stories you've been raised with, stories about the ancients and their way of life. They are the stories that were told to you by grandparents, uncles, aunts, fathers, and mothers. Stories to let you see your life in the greater context of Tototepec in Mexico. Stories that were means by which you gained a sense of an identity. But as you grew and went to school, you gained an understanding of life outside of Tototepec. You began to adopt a way of thinking that didn't seem to include or value the oral traditions of your culture. Through the Spanish language, you may have discovered a world too big to understand through your cultural lens. But the study and development of both these languages can better express your new dual identities and enable you to overcome the challenges unique to your life in Mexico as a Mije speaker. Research on the study and development of oral stories that incorporate indigenous and second languages shows bilingual children's overall academic achievement, active participation in learning and development of positive self image, self esteem, and respect increased. Girls and boys developed significantly higher levels of self esteem, a greater capacity for adaptation, and a more tolerant attitude in cases of frustration. Another example of the development of oral stories involves the Centro Editorial de Literatura Indígena that encouraged the development of indigenous languages through stories to produce bodies of native literature in various indigenous languages. Participants developed stories in their own languages about their lives, their customs, their legends, histories, and natural medicine. The object was to make the use of indigenous languages a normal everyday thing. The result was an expansion of possible educational tools that allowed for stronger academic baselines for further studies in the greater social setting. As non-native English speakers in the United States, the challenges I faced growing up are like the challenges you face now as non-native Spanish speakers who learn one language at home and another in school. I remember going to school and participating in fully English-speaking classes with absolutely no Spanish used by other students or teachers. But yet I was able not only to keep up, but in some cases surpass many of my classmates in reading and writing in the English language. I noticed a lot of the students at Tibetan were second and third generation Mexican children who only spoke English. I know now that much of my academic success was due to my early bilingual education that enabled me to understand and more quickly use the complex patterns that govern the use of English. I think this worked because I was constantly in a state of consciously and unconsciously digesting and comparing two languages and using them in very real ways. This process must also be true of Mika speakers who learn and use two languages in their daily lives. At home, almost every night, our fathers made us reciting Spanish verses from the Bible, and at school I was constantly putting pen to paper, honing my writing skills in English. So again, I can verify the benefits of oral traditions at home and the development of reading and writing in school. As I've tried to show, there is a need for Mika speakers to express themselves using ways that incorporate their cultural background and the Spanish language. Talk to a grandparent. Ask them to share their stories with you. Listen to them and remember. Then find a friend and tell him those stories. Go with him to listen to his grandparents' stories. Listen to him and remember. Retell those stories in both Mika and Spanish. Listen and remember.